Alright, so welcome back to Everdell Spirecrest. So for this video, which might take a video or two to do, we're going to be going over the Discover cards, the rest of the Discover cards that we haven't gone over yet, obviously, because we did all the big critters in the last one. Starting with the Foothills pile. So let's get started. Alright, so the first one is one of my favorites, and I have actually gotten to play with this before. This is the Mountaineer. When you get this, you'll get to ignore the weather effects for spring. So that's really cool. So whatever spring happens to be, you're going to get this preparing for spring. You won't be affected by whatever weather card is out for spring, which I don't know, could be something like the heavy rain. So if the heavy rain was out and you had the Mountaineer, you would not be affected by heavy rain. You would also not be affected by the lightning storms. Other players, of course, would be. And that same thing for heavy rain. And you would not be affected by the tornado, but of course, other players would be affected by those weather conditions anyways. But only for spring. That means the weather conditions for summer and autumn will still affect you, even though you have the Mountaineer. So that's still pretty useful. But that's not all it does. You also may play 2 cards from this location instead, which is the peak pile. So the peak pile are these cards here, which also include the majority of the big critters are going to be in this pile as well. And so you're going to get to look at 3 of them like normal, but you're going to get to play 2 of the 3 if you want to. So that is awesome. So this is like twice as good, because you're not affected by a season of spring, which makes spring a whole lot easier for you and a whole lot harder for all the other opponents. But then you're also going to get 2 cards of your choice for the next season, for the preparing for the next season, which is really awesome, obviously. So this one is definitely probably one of the best ones there is, and it's probably even better than any of the big critters that you might get, which is obviously Truffle and that moose, obviously. So this is still better than them, if you ask me. Alright, next one. Okay, so this one is the Trail Guide. And obviously, he's a northern cardinal, while the Mountaineer was a panda, a red panda. So, when played, place up to 3 critters beneath this card from the meadow or / your hand, or from your hand. You may play a card from beneath this Trail Guide for 2 berries less. So if you have a few critters in your hand or in the meadow, this is totally worth getting, especially if you want to play them, because if you don't want to play the building for them, but you want to play a bunch of critters without the buildings, then this is going to decrease the berry cost by 2. And that's really awesome. And you're going to have 3 there, so you're going to get your money's worth for sure. So this one is definitely a good one to get. Then we have the Map Seller. And you'll see there's an open sign here. So this is sort of like a red destination location. If you're the player that has the Map Seller, but one of your opponents decides to go here, you're going to get a point token for the cost, basically. They're not giving you a point token, you're just going to get a point token from the supply because they're going here. Each player may only have up to 1 worker here. So if you put a worker here, you can't put 2 of your workers at this location. You may draw cards from the meadow and or discard pile to your hand limit. So if you don't have very many cards, let's just say you had like 1 or 2 cards, this one is definitely worth doing. You put your worker here, you can draw up to your hand limit from either the meadow or the discard pile. So if there's some good cards in the meadow, it's a good way of getting some good cards from the meadow that you might want to play later. Or maybe there's some cards you had to discard for something, for some reason you had no choice, or because you wouldn't have gotten a good resource or whatever the case is. But there could be some good cards in the discard pile that you were maybe thinking possibly you weren't going to play with, maybe they weren't useful, and then you drew a card later down the road, and that card happened to be really good. And then you're like, oh, I discarded that other card. Man, oh man. So, I mean, this could be very useful, getting a bunch of cards from the discard pile, too. And this is something you're going to get to do several times throughout the game if you want to, because it's going to be available for all of the seasons, starting with obviously spring. So that's the map seller. Then we have a lot of these cards will just give you straight victory points at the end of the game. So here we have the Ever Blossom Trail. You're going to get 4 points if you have at least 3 purple prosperity cards in your city at the end of the game. Then we have the Forager. When you gain berries, draw 1 card for each berry you gained. So here's the hedgehog here. He's gathering up berries. So let's say you get 2 berries from a resource location. Let's say it's, let's just say for the point of argument, you're getting 3 berries from a forest location, because there is a forest location that can give you 3 berries. You can also draw a card for each berry you gained. That's pretty cool. And then, obviously, it's whenever you gain berries. So, during your green production phase, let's say you have a farm out. The farm produces berries. Every time you get a berry from the farm, you're going to get to draw a card as well. So that's really cool. So that's another interesting thing. So the Forager is definitely a useful one to get if you want a lot of berries and cards, for sure. It also makes it worth getting those farms out, because it's going to give you a whole bunch of extra cards. Then we have Green Sprout Trail. I think this works with green production cards, obviously, because it's green. You can get 4 points at the end of the game if you have at least 4 green production cards in your city. Prospector, which is in a possum. It's an opossum. When you gain points, you may discard 1 card and or draw 1 card for every point gained. So that's kind of interesting. Now you get some points. You could get some extra cards as well for point tokens that you get. Then we have the Archaeologist, and this one is also pretty cool too. This one's actually probably better than the Trail Guide, because I especially like to put lots of construction buildings in my town. Anyways, when played, place up to 3 constructions beneath this card from the meadow and or your hand, and then you may play a card from beneath this Archaeologist for -1 resource of your choice. So this is really useful to get, and this is not something I have actually gotten to play with yet, but if it comes around and it's better than some of the other ones, I'll probably choose this one, because that's a really cool one. Then we have the Sun Blaze Trail. If you have at least 3 red destination cards in your city, this will be worth 4 points. Starfall Trail. If you have at least 3 blue governance cards in your city, this will be worth 4 points. Cartographers Caravan. Now this one is really cool. It's definitely being pulled by a turtle. That's pretty cool. Anyways, this has got another one of those open signs, so your opponents can go here, but if they do, you're going to get a point token for every opponent that puts a worker here. Each player may only have up to 1 worker here. This is what this does. You'll draw 3 cards, and you'll also gain 1 resource of your choice for each worker here, including the worker you just placed. So if you're the first person to put a worker here, you're going to get a resource of your choice plus 3 cards. The second player who puts a worker here, they're going to get 3 cards plus 2 resources of their choice. And if there's 2 workers here, and a third player puts down their worker at this location, you're going to get 3 resources of your choice plus 3 cards. So that's really powerful, especially for the person who goes here last. That's really cool for sure. Also, you're going to get point tokens for the other players that go here. So you're getting something for when other players put their workers here anyways. So that's still pretty useful in a way. This is definitely one of the best ones there is, for sure. And it's definitely not one I've gotten to play with. So I hope to play with that someday soon. And then the last one that's in this pile, the foothill pile, is if you have at least 3 tan traveler cards in your city, you'll get 4 points for the Mist Rise Trail. And that's it for that pile of cards. Let's continue on and see what we can get on the next pile. So there shouldn't be too many in this pile, because most of the cards in this pile are actually all of the big critters that we went over in the last video. So let's get started. Gray Cloak's Hideout. This is obviously like a red destination card. You can put your worker here. But it does not have an open sign, so only the player who gets this card gets to put a worker at this location. You may move one of your deployed workers here to reactivate the location that worker was on. So having Great Cloak's hideout is going to let you reactivate a location where you had a worker deployed. That's really cool. You're just going to simply put that worker that was deployed there to here to activate over there. So that's really cool. That's a useful one to get. Then we have Ruins of Spire. And this one also does not have the open sign, so only the player who gets this card will get to access this location by placing a worker here. Gain 3 resources comprised of twigs, resin, or pebbles. So you can choose what resources you want out of those 3. They do not have to be the same resource. They can be different resources, but it can only be these 3, and it can be only up to 3 resources, obviously. Or should I say you're going to get 3 resources. Okay. This one's really interesting. Tezel's Laboratory. And it doesn't have the open sign, so only the player who gets this card can go here. You may discard a certain amount of cards, an X amount of cards, so an X means any number of cards, basically, from your hand, and then you then play a card for that amount of cards that you discarded, much less. So basically, let's say you discarded 5 cards from your hand. Let's just say that was the number, because you can discard up to 8 technically, because usually your hand limit is 8, unless you're playing with powers or something from, Belfair, for instance. But the point is, you're probably only going to have 8 cards in your hand at most. But let's say you discarded 5 cards from your hand, you could then play a card. Then you'll play a card from your hand, so that means you still have to have another card in your hand, obviously, or on the meadow. And then you'll get to pay that many resources less for it. So if you discarded 5 cards, if it was from the meadow or from your hand, that card will cost 5 resources less of your choice. That's powerful. So even if you only discard a couple of cards or a few cards, this is still a very useful one to get, because you're going to get to do this twice throughout the game. You're going to get to do this during summer, and you're going to get to do this during, obviously, autumn. Wait, hold on. Yeah. You're going to get to do that for summer and autumn. So you're going to get to do it twice. So that's pretty cool. Then we have Malaya Mines. It's got the open sign, so opponents that put their workers here, you're going to get a point token for that. Obviously, each player may only have up to 1 worker here. You're going to reveal 1 card at a time up to your hand limit, so meaning probably 8 cards, unless of course you have a power that says otherwise, stopping any time to draw all revealed cards and gain 1 point token for each. If any cards matches a meadow card, stop immediately and gain absolutely nothing. It doesn't say absolutely, but gain nothing, because you won't gain a thing. You won't gain points, you won't gain cards if a card ends up matching the meadow. So this is almost like a gamble. You're gambling possibly for a lot of cards and a lot of points. If you're lucky enough to draw up to 8 cards, which is your hand limit, you get to keep the cards, assuming you have room for them, and you're going to get 8 victory points as well. But if you end up drawing a meadow card, let's say you decided to draw up to 8, and the 7th card or the 8th card ended up matching the meadow, then you lose all of the points and all of the cards that were drawn that way. So obviously, don't go too high. If you're going to do this, it might be better to just do 2 or 3 or 4 at most, so that way you get a few points, a few cards, without the possibility, hopefully, and you hopefully won't end up drawing a card that happens to also be in the meadow. So that is something to note. So this is like a gamble card. But at least if other players go here, you can get a point token. Then we have Belsan Trail. This is worth 4 points if you complete your expedition. So if you are able to complete all 3 of your map tiles that you got at the end of the game, you're going to get an additional 4 points for this card. And there's 2 more actually, 3 more. Let's continue. Cloud Rim Peak. This is another one of those red destination-like locations, basically, so you can put a worker here, but only you can if you're the one that got this. Discard 5 differently colored cards, then gain 8 points. So that's kind of interesting. So if you have all 5 of the different colored cards in your hand, you could discard all of them to get 8 points. But you have to have that many exactly if you're going to get the 8 points, and you also have to place a worker there to do it. But it's possible you could do this twice in the game. Then we have Ancient Orchard, and this is another location where you can place your worker. You can place your worker here in the Ancient Orchard and get 5 berries. So that's kind of interesting. Only you can go there if you're the player that got this. And then the last one is called Storm Vale. You'll draw 3 cards from the deck and place them face up nearby. Anyone may play any of these cards. You gain 1 point token each time an opponent plays 1 card from that location, and you'll replenish any cards that were played. So you have 3 cards there. You play a card from that location, nothing else happens except you get to play a card from that location, as in from Storm Vale, basically. And then if an opponent does it, you'll get a point token every time they do it, and it could happen quite a bit because you're going to replenish those cards played. So there will always be 3 cards. So this is sort of like an additional meadow, except at this location, you're going to be getting extra points if somebody else decides to play a card, basically from Storm Vale. So that's really, really cool. Alright, so let's continue on in the next video and do the rest of the cards, which is just the last pile, which is the Ridge pile. And most of them are just for victory points anyways. But there are a few good ones. So we'll continue on in the next video.